What's up guys, this is Joseph with Slidio Studios, and today we're going to be taking a look on how to film a cinematic commercial. So let's take a look at this example.
Noise cancelling.
So that was pretty good. It showed the product very well. It was very engaging. So how do we do this? Well, the first thing that I would like to say is this really depends on the product that you're trying to show. So this is sort of like a hard tutorial to do because it depends a lot on the product, of course. But in this example, and for most of your shots, I would say focus on things that you want to highlight in the feature. So work with your clients, or if you're just doing if you're doing your own product, then focus on the features that you really want to show. Maybe make a bullet point of features. So in this headphone example, we wanted to show the headphone in its natural state, right? But one of the features that we really wanted to show was noise cancellation. So that's why in the beginning, we sort of show how without noise cancellation, you could hear the streets, you could hear a lot of sound. And the moment he turns on noise cancellation, it gets rid of those noise and it also allows him to play the music. So to do this in our shot, for example, we need to shoot in an open street where there are moving cars and stuff like that, at least in the background. So to give the audience an idea of how loud the background is without noise cancellation and with noise cancellation. So to really bring the audience in to what difference this feature makes. So this is sort of, again, this is very difficult for me to say. There's no like rule because all your products are different, but I'm just gonna give an example. If you're doing a watch, for example, and there's a specific feature that you wanna show, just make sure you show it in its natural state, because that way the audience can really relate with the product rather than showing it in a very controlled environment, and it's sort of hard for the audience to understand. So I would say just make bullet points of certain features that you wanna shoot, have a basic idea of what kind of angles and how you want to shoot it, but be a little bit more flexible with the location and stuff like that, just because on the day of shoot, sometimes unfortunately the lighting may not be how you want it, the lighting may not show the product in the best of its ability. And if you shoot it with a very well thought out plan, then it's not going to look good. So be open-minded in terms of stuff like location and the exact angle and stuff like that, because sometimes lighting does change, but still have a basic idea. I would say bullet points. And in this shot, we just, we knew that we wanted the actor to wear the headphones, turn on noise cancellation, and then start walking and stuff and start listening to music and go along with the beat. And that's sort of like the basic idea. You don't want to go too much in detail. So planning wise, you really have to work with your clients to make sure that you're showing the product to the best of its ability. Now with cinematic commercial, pretty much a gimbal or any kind of stabilizer system is a must. You need to be moving your camera because you need to bring the audience in. If you just have a static shot, it might work for some shots, but overall a static shot would just be very difficult. Like if you're going to be doing a shoe commercial and you have a static shot, that wouldn't really work. So you really need to move the camera with the actor one way or the other. So pretty much a Steadicam or a gimbal is pretty much a must. And another important thing is you want to make sure you're familiarized with the gimbal and the Steadicam. It's pointless if you have a Steadicam, even if you have the best Steadicam in the world or best gimbal in the world, but you're not very good at operating it, you're not really going to get smooth shots. So you want to make sure you're very familiar with how you walk, how to make your shots more natural, how to stay within composition when you're walking and stuff like that. So it is very important to get familiarized with your tools. Now, one trick you could do is to shoot at a slightly higher frame rate. So for example, our entire commercial, we were shooting at 60 frames per second. That just gives us a little bit more leeway in the editing. We could slow it down a bit to make stuff look a lot more cinematic. It would smooth out a tiny bit of jitter if you do have those in your video, because it can be hard to get rid of the Z-axis movements, especially for the gimbal. So shooting at a higher frame rate would just help a little bit with that. But keep in mind, if you're shooting at 30 frames per second and you're not getting good footage, slowing it down to 50% isn't really going to help much with that. Another thing to note is that if you're going to be slowing it down from 60 to 30 frames per second, it would be very, very slow. If you have products that you need to show fast movement, like for example, I was saying for shoes or certain other products, then you might not have the flexibility to slow down as much. Even for the headphone commercial, I found that 50% is just way too slow. So I typically slow down around 20 to 30% of that. So it's not really going to help you fix the gimbal footage. It's only going to smooth it out by just a tad bit. Of course, you can add things like warp stabilization if you want and stuff like that in post if that's your last resort. Now, keep in mind though, in Premiere, you cannot add warp stabilization and slow down time at the same time. So if you want to add those two effects, if you want to be able to slow down and also add warp, you have to render it first. So it's just a little bit more into post-production. So overall, it's just best to get familiarized with your gimbal in the first place so you don't have to use so much in post to sort of fix those small jitters and stuff like that. Now, pretty much if you're going to be shooting in broad daylight and stuff like that, pretty much log is the recommended format. In our example, broad daylight means that you have a lot of dynamic range issues. So we have things very, very bright in the highlights and some subjects are in the shadow. So the only way for us to preserve those dynamic range was pretty much to shoot in log. So if your camera can support log, then pretty much just shoot in that format. If your camera isn't able to support log, then you do have to be a little bit more careful about your location, about your timing, so you're not shooting with lower dynamic range, where it can look a little bit more amateur. And as always, this is a cinematic commercial, so you want to follow the traditional cinematic rules. Use ND filters when needed, use proper exposure, shutter speed. If you're going to be shooting at 60, double your shutter speed to around 120. I don't think you can actually do 120, maybe like 125 or 160. And if you're going to be just shooting at 30 frames per second, then just make sure it's at least 160. Make sure your shutter speed isn't too high so you get that natural motion blur. Make sure ISO is at the base ISO so you get the most dynamic range with the least amount of noise. Just follow your traditional rules and you should get a pretty nice, pleasing image. Now, focusing could be a little bit of a challenge. For us, we're going to be using the Mica manual lenses, so it does require a whole follow focus system. If your camera support it, pretty much use all the focusing features you have. Follow focus peaking and stuff like that is very helpful. If you can use a separate monitor, that could also help. If it's a bigger production, if you can get some of your friends, maybe have someone on a wireless follow focus so you can fully focus on getting the best shots and stuff like that. Just make sure your subject is relatively in focus. If it's moving, it can be slightly off focus and people won't really see it. But it's a good practice to really get familiarized with the focus too, because you don't want your product to look blurry, and that's not really good. And in terms of lens choices, this just depends on the product that you're showing. For example, since we're showing the headphones, there's going to be a lot of close-up shots of the face and of the whole structure. So we want to make sure we're using a lens that doesn't compress it too much. So a 50mm equivalent full frame, anything tighter than that, it's very hard to stabilize with a gimbal. Anything wider than that, then we start running into lens compression issues. It doesn't look very natural, very cinematic. So pretty much I just went with 50mm equivalent for full frame. And it is a bit challenging on a tighter shot to use a gimbal, but it's pretty much a must. So I just kind of had to deal with it and get some more shots and practice with it to make sure it's very smooth. Depending on the product, for our product, pretty much we want to try to reduce as much wide shot as possible, because wide shots can be a little bit distracting and can be hard for the audience to focus on the product. If you're doing like a t-shirt, or if you're doing apparel, or if you're doing like a full outfit, then wide shots would make sense for those instances. But if you're doing any kind of close-up, a watch, shoes, or like I said, the headphones or a hat or anything, then close-up is pretty much needed. Try to reduce the wide shot as much as possible. You might be able to add wide shots in the beginning to sort of engage the audience, to get the audience knowing where they are in the scene. But after that, after the few wide shots that you have, pretty much focus on the close-up shots so that your audience doesn't get distracted by the other thing. Because at the end of the day, this is a commercial, so you're trying to focus on the actual product. Another important thing is sometimes shots are very, very critical, so you want to make sure that you are getting the right shots. So it might take a long time. It might take 3 or 4 or even 10 takes, but it's very important that you be patient and get the right shots, because if you don't have the right shot, you're not going to have a very good commercial. So you want to make sure if you feel a little bit of jitter on your camera when you're looking at it, walking with a gimbal or Steadicam or anything like that, then make sure you redo it. You redo it as many times as you can, because you want to make sure you get those perfect shots. The other thing is sort of get more shots than you need, because a lot of times when you're in post, you might realize that this shot has already been seen. This shot is kind of pointless, or the shot is already kind of cliche looking. So in that case, if you have more shots, then you can add those in. For this headphone commercial, we actually have 3 different shots that never made it. And it's not like they were bad scenes or anything. I just didn't feel like they fit, or maybe they were a little bit too similar to the other shots. So I just didn't end up using them. So make sure you get as many shots as possible. That way in post, you have a little bit more flexibility. And if your client wants you to add a different scene or anything, you don't have to refilm it and anything like that. You already have extra shots that you can add in. Now, another thing that you want to focus on is adding graphics to your scene. So if you want to add any kind of text, any kind of scenes, you want to make sure that you're following rule of thirds. You give a good amount of space for you to be able to add text. So for example, here in the beginning, we follow a simple rule of thirds on one of the 3 lines, and we're able to add the text. And then in the end over here, we are also following that same rule, and we're able to add the text. So if you're going to be adding a lot of graphics, since this is a simple commercial, I didn't really choose to do that a lot, but if I was doing a very complicated products or something like that, where I really need to highlight the features with text, then you want to think about where you want to place the text as you're filming, rather than trying to squeeze it in where it just looks a little bit unnatural. So following rule of thirds and stuff like that is usually ideal, because that will usually give you a good amount of space either on the left or the right to be able to add things like graphics and stuff like that. All right, so that's pretty much the filming process. Again, this is just about hours to getting a lot of practice. Now let's talk about the editing process, which is just as important in my opinion than the filming process. So the first thing that you want to do is find a good song that fits your product. You want to make sure that it makes the product in its best ability. Now for commercials like this, we typically want to change the shot every 5 seconds. I like to go by this 5-second rule that I made up, where every 5 seconds there's a new scene or a new graphic or something, because anything longer than that and it can keep the audience a little bit bored. You want to make sure the audience is engaged. This is a commercial. They're not volunteering to watch this, they're watching this out of spite. So you want to make sure that you're keeping the audience engaged, and this is where the 5-second rule is very useful, to make sure that the shot changes every 5 seconds. So in this case, for music choice, we want to make sure that we have the beats drop at least 5 seconds every time, so that there is place for us to cut. You don't always have to cut directly on the beat, but it will just make the music feel like it's part of the video. So just make sure that you find a song that's not too slow or too fast. That's just the right speed, especially for the product that you're trying to film, and make sure that you cut it in near the beats or to make the music feel like it's part of the song. Now there's also certain editing techniques that you can add that I didn't personally need it for this shot, but let's say if the music does speed up on certain parts, then you can have the video physically speed up in time, and you can also have it slow down when the music slow down. There's a lot of different take that you can have, but just make sure the music fits very, very well with the song. Make sure your edit is very clean. Make sure you follow that 5-second rule. Every 5 seconds, try to change the shot, or if you can't do that, add some graphics to keep the audience engaged. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So this is sort of like a tips and tricks videos. I hope you found a lot of the tips in this video useful. Again, it's all about getting more practice. Once you get more practice with it, you kind of have an idea what shots work, which shots don't work. And if you're new to this process, I would say just shoot a lot more scenes so that you have a lot more flexibility in the edit. Everything in a commercial sort of has to come together, so it is a lot of work in the beginning, but once you get practice with it, once you get more hours with it, it should be pretty easy. So yeah, I hope you found this video useful. If you like it, please subscribe, and I'll see you next time with another video.